Today on the Playbook Podcast, the British royal family rolls out the red carpet for Donald Trump. 1 week on from the killing of Charlie Kirk, we'll discuss all the fallout. And there are two huge moments happening here in DC today. The ousted head of the CDC is in the Senate, and the Fed decides whether, at last, to cut interest rates. Hello, I am Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Wednesday, September 17th.
This is the Playbook Podcast. Megan, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Thanks for joining. We get to talk about Britain. That's a rare treat for me this morning.
I know, so true to form. We have the expert here.
We have the expert here indeed. All right, well, let me give you a quick rundown of what's going to happen. Basically, we're going to get this really weird split screen thing happening all day today because we've got Donald Trump and Melania Trump over in the UK on a state visit, and today is Royal Family Day. We're going to get all the pomp and ceremony starting pretty early in the morning because they're obviously a few hours ahead of us over there. And we're going to see all these images coming from Windsor Castle. That's one of the main royal palaces just outside London. And Meghan, Britain is pulling out all the stops. We're going to see the military parades, the flyovers, the marching bands, people in the funny clothes, all the history stuff that we like to do so well. You're going to get to see it all this morning. This is the second time Donald Trump's had a state visit. And it's actually, I think, it's the first American president to get two, which he is very proud about. And Britain made a big deal about when, not unreasonable, when he was invited for the second one earlier this year. I was at the first one in 2017, working for Politico over in the UK at that time. And you could just see how much he's having a good time. Like, he does this sort of solemn face, doesn't he, when he's doing these things? He tries to, no, he is, he's dignified and he looks good in his clothes. He stands up very tall and all the rest of it. But you just see how much he's loving it. It almost feels like part of the thing he loves the most about the presidency is these kinds of moments, these kinds of rubbing shoulders with royalty and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's the honor of the occasion. It's the visuals of the occasion, right? The president is a very visual person. He's always thinking about, how the photos and how the videos are going to turn up. This is exactly the kind of thing he loves.
He may be a little disappointed by the British weather then. I suspect it's going to drizzle on him all day, which doesn't get...
Well, that's life over there, isn't
tell
it?
me about it. Tell me about it. At the same time as Britain does all this, and of course the reason Britain is doing all this is because it is desperate to curry favour with Donald Trump, and it knows this is a pretty easy way to do that successfully. But while Britain is doing all this, it's important to remember Donald Trump remains spectacularly unpopular in Britain. He polls appallingly badly. Most people don't like him. He's, this sort of brash approach, let alone his politics, not massively popular in the UK. Although there is a growing band of people that like him, it's very much the minority. And so what we'll also see today, and in fact we've already started seeing last night, is protests. So I remember going up to Blenheim Palace, and the streets, country lanes were lined with protesters for miles as all the press were getting bussed in there. I'm sure that's going to happen again today. And in fact, did you see last night the protesters beaming unfortunate images onto the side of the castle? Did you see that?
That I did, Jack.
Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump arm in arm beamed onto Windsor Castle. That's not the sort of imagery the president likes.
No, it's not. It's not. And all the more in the spotlight after Ambassador Mendelsohn was recalled back to the UK.
Well, exactly. So. Awkward timing. For those who haven't followed that, Britain's man in Washington was fired the other day because of his links to Jeffrey Epstein, which have come out and some of the correspondence has been released. So there'll be awkward questions about that. But that's all for tomorrow. Tomorrow, Trump does press conference in the UK. Tomorrow, Trump meets Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, for talks. There will be big deals announced and so on. That's tomorrow's political bit. Today is the royal bit, and it'll basically be pictures. And when I said at the start, there'll be this split screen. And the reason I say that is because all day we're going to be fired with these amazing footage of Trump with the royals at the castle, at banquets and so on. But there's so much important stuff happening back here in America that the news channels are going to have to keep cutting between these sort of pomp and circumstance to very, very, very serious events, policy announcements, moments that are going to be happening through the day. And of course, Megan, we're now 1 week on from the awful killing of Charlie Kirk, and there's no sign of this story ebbing away off the news agenda in any sense. We saw Kash Patel, the FBI chief, in the Senate yesterday. He will be back in Congress today to do the same thing in front of a House committee, and I'm sure we'll see more of the angry back and forths that we saw with Kash Patel yesterday. Beyond that, though, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, Megan, in terms of Charlie Kirk. And one is this growing debate around free speech. We talked about this on the podcast yesterday, and we had these rather extraordinary remarks from the Attorney General Pam Bondi on Monday night about how she's going to come after people over hate speech, which seemed to be A, unconstitutional, and B, not what you'd expect to hear from MAGA world. And sure enough, there seems to be a pretty big backlash on the right against Pam Bondi for this sort of talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we saw that immediate backlash, which might surprise some folks, but I think actually makes a lot of sense because this is an argument that folks on the right have been making for a long time that they have been restricted from saying things that folks on the left have categorized as hate speech. And they didn't like that, right? And so, they're looking at this saying, hey, we here in the US believe in free speech. That is a pretty darn broad definition based on how the Supreme Court has interpreted the First Amendment. There are some exceptions, incitement to violence, obscenity, things like that. But by and large, hate speech is protected. There is this belief that you should be able to say things as long as they are not causing immediate harm to folks. And again, I think sort of the free speech purists on both the right and the left, we're sort of shocked here to hear what Attorney General Pam Bondi said. But at the same time, I think it kind of pokes at some of this tension that we're seeing here over language, over who should have the power to speak, over the free flow of ideas and censorship. I just think about some of what we've seen in terms of the backlash to academia and these sort of liberal elite institutions. But now it almost seems like you have the right pushing back, saying, we want to sort of censor these ideas on the left, right? So it's these two things in tension, and really hard to suss out here. But I think the fact that we saw Pam Bondi quickly walk those statements back was indicative of, one, folks obviously reminding her of what the law is on that and what the Constitution says. But two, that so many folks on the right really do believe in this idea of free speech.
Absolutely. It's hard to remember an attorney general making so many high profile missteps as we've seen from Bondi over the last few months, and ones that make her unpopular with Trump's own supporters. Obviously, the
Right.
Epstein situation would be another one. I'd love to hear from Donald Trump on this. He got asked about it yesterday by ABC News, but he just responded with a rather angry, aggressive, flippant answer like, well, maybe we'll come after you. Did kind of ignored it, the actual point. Trump is doing a proper sit-down interview with Fox News today, which will be airing this afternoon from the UK. And I would hope that they will get into that with him because it will be interesting to see. We know the president loves Pam Bondi, but the president is on the record enough times talking about free speech. It will be interesting to see where he stands on this and where he thinks the line should be drawn, and whether he might be in conflict with some of his own supporters on this as well. Um, the other thing I just wanted to say about Charlie Kirk before we move on is we got yesterday the first sight of the list of speakers who are going to be speaking at his funeral on Sunday in Arizona, and it's really turning into quite an extraordinary event. The event is happening at a football stadium, so we're looking at tens of thousands of people being in the stadium for this. The list includes President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr., DNI Tulsi Gabbard, and Stephen Miller from the White House, Susie Wiles from the White House. And the list goes on. That is already 7 of the most senior people in the American government all planning to speak at this funeral. I don't think anything like this has ever happened in America. I can't think of any comparable event to this. It's going to be an extraordinary moment, and just gives a sense of the way I think the conservative movement is galvanizing behind this moment and trying to use this moment to create some sort of new forward momentum.
Truly, yeah, that stunning list of speakers highlights a couple of different things. I mean, one, just the wide ranging impact that Charlie Kirk had on the conservative movement, right? And will continue to have. Um, and so I think, sort of not surprising to see these folks come out. And again, obviously, in response to such a tragic incident. But two, I think it really is this sort of moment of reckoning for conservatives of where do we go from here? What's the response? What's the action? Are we going to come together and listen to our better angels? Are we going to, double down and dig deeper into these divisions in the country? I mean, so I know that's one of the things I'll be watching for. How do they talk about Charlie Kirk's legacy? What he means for the future of the Republican Party and the MAGA movement. Is it a message of anger and division, or are there any calls to say, hey, clearly we have a problem in this country of political violence? What can we do to make this better?
We must move on because there's two other massive things happening right here in DC today. Let's take them in chronological order because this morning, the former director of the CDC, Susan Monarez, who was fired by RFK Jr. very abruptly just a few weeks ago from her post as essentially the top public health official in the country, she is going to speak for the first time since that happened, and she's going to be before the Senate Help Committee this morning at 10 o'clock. And that is going to be a blockbuster hearing because we know that there was a row between her and RFK Jr. about vaccine policy in the US. And this hearing comes just a couple of days before a key vaccine committee meets to decide future vaccine policy in the US, a committee that has been handpicked by RFK Jr. and known vaccine skeptics. So what Susan Monarez says today to the senators, Megan, is going to be a really big deal because we know even Republicans on the committee are worried by what RFK is doing.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we've seen is this, push and pull in the Republican Party about vaccines, about the Maha movement, right? I think you see among Republicans writ large sort of this natural inclination to say, what are these vaccines we're taking? What are these pills we're putting in our bodies? What are the chemicals in our foods, right? And then you see the version of it that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. really believes in, which is this, um, you know, serious, deep seated, concerns, skepticism of vaccines. And we see that working its way into public policy in ways that could have really significant implications for public health. I mean, the reason that vaccine recommendations and school immunization requirements exist is because so many of these, childhood illnesses used to just kill tons and tons of kids, right? And so these were implemented to try to eradicate diseases that now are really rare, right? And so now, I think we see the Republican Party grappling with this, but what's been highlighted by Susan Monarez's firing is, I think, those two things coming into conflict. The fact that, one, you can't have folks say maybe there's some legitimacy to these conversations, but two, no, we do believe in the science, and we think there are instances where this might be going too far. And for folks like Senator Bill Cassidy, for Senator Susan Collins, firing Susan Monarez seems to have been, a bridge too far, as they were really grilling Kennedy over her firing. So it'll be really interesting to see what exactly she says. We've obviously gotten a preview of some of her remarks. We're going to get her side of the story here, but it's certainly to be a fireworks
Yeah,
hearing.
she says, according to sort of remarks she's written that have been leaked out ahead of the committee, that she was told by RFK that she had to fire some of her top vaccine officials on his say so, that she had to get prior approval for anyone new she wanted to bring in, and that she had to pre-approve any vaccine recommendations. So him clearly trying to take a very firm grip on vaccine policy, which she saw as completely inappropriate. He, of course, has no medical training, and ended up that row ended up with her being fired. He says that he has a different version of events, which we heard a few days ago from him. And the other thing I just want to say on this before we move on is the thing I'll be really watching for today, Megan, is the Republican reaction to what she says on that committee, because there are plenty of very controversial things the Trump administration does that Republicans are happy to go along with because they think it's popular with the base, it's popular with the country, even if, the so-called mainstream media complain or whatever they say, they think it's winning them votes. This is very different. Vaccines are very popular in the US, and so they're worried by what he's doing because ones in marginal seats fear that this could actually cost them votes in a big way.
Absolutely. And I will say, some of my White House sources have, talked to me a little bit about some of the political thinking here with vaccines. And the overall thought here is there are folks who are adamantly anti-vax. There are folks who are adamantly pro-vaccine. But the White House's view is that the majority of Americans are somewhere in the middle, right? Again, sort of that vein of the Maha moms, folks who want to know what's in their kids' vaccines and in their kids' food, but aren't necessarily opposed wholesale to vaccines. And that's really who the White House is trying to court and knows it needs to keep in its camp ahead of the midterms. So the big thing that the White House is really focused on here is just the overall perception of public health, and is public health headed in the right direction?
As if that wasn't enough news for you today. Just around the corner in DC at 2:30 this afternoon, Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, will emerge from the Federal Reserve's two-day meeting to announce the board's decision, I should say, on whether or not to cut interest rates. And the wide expectation is that after months of complaints from the president, after months of deliberating and holding the line, they are today going to cut interest rates, probably by a small amount, but nevertheless, the first cut in a long time. And the expectations of the market is that it'll be the first in a series of cuts that we see through the rest of this year. That will be a very big moment, and it's moved from just being a big economic moment, Megan, into a very big political moment as well. And that is almost entirely due to the president and his one-man war on Jay Powell and the interest rates.
Precisely. And I just thinking about going into this day, I mean, this is kind of the best outcome for the Fed and Jay Powell because, on one hand, they're poised to do exactly what the president wants and lower interest rates. At the same time, they're doing so for totally legitimate reasons that won't undermine the credibility of the Fed. And so again, this is sort of like the best case scenario. They can sort of have their cake and eat it too. But obviously, we're still in a really tricky economic situation. To be determined where we go in the coming months from here, as we still see pressures from tariffs and workforce numbers with fewer foreign workers in the country. There's still a lot of factors here that are really pressing on the economy. Even what we see today from the Fed will not be the end of it.
Megan, when Jay Powell's announcing this decision this afternoon, Donald Trump will be inside Windsor Castle preparing for a massive royal state banquet. I suspect whatever is announced, it won't be enough for the president. All right, we better leave it there. Megan, thanks so much as always for joining us. That's all we got time for today's show. We've got much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we shall be back tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.